They were told that American soldiers would burn them alive, that their families would be shamed forever, that death was better than capture. But when 47 Japanese women in tattered military uniforms stepped off the transport ship in San Francisco Bay, August 1945, what they faced was not American cruelty, it was American rage. Hundreds of civilians lined the docks, screaming, throwing stones, faces twisted with hatred. The women ran, crying, covering their heads. And then something impossible happened. The American guards stepped between them and the mob. The enemy became their shield. They expected death. They received protection. If you want to hear more incredible true stories from World War II that most people don't know about, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Now let's continue with this remarkable story. The morning fog hung thick over San Francisco Bay, turning the water gray and the city into shadows. On the deck of the USS transport ship, 47 women stood in two ragged lines, their hands gripping the rail so hard their knuckles turned white. They wore what remained of their Japanese military auxiliaries uniforms, the Joshigun volunteers, once neat gray-green skirts and jackets, now torn, stained with oil and sweat, and faded by weeks at sea. Most were young, between 18 and 25 years old. Their faces were thin, hollow from poor rations during the final months of the Pacific War. Some had been radio operators on remote islands, others nurses in field hospitals, a few secretaries at military command posts. When the war ended with the Emperor's surrender broadcast on August 15th, they had been gathered up like scattered papers, herded onto ships, and told they were being taken to America as prisoners of war. During the 2-week voyage across the Pacific, they barely spoke. They huddled together in the cargo hold at night, sleeping on thin blankets spread over the metal floor. The ship's engines rumbled constantly beneath them. Some women wept quietly in the darkness. Others stared at nothing, their minds still hearing the sound of bombs, still seeing the flash of explosions that had torn through their duty stations. A young woman named Keiko, 22 years old, formerly a radio operator on Saipan, kept a small notebook hidden in her uniform pocket. She had been writing in it since her capture, though she didn't know why. Perhaps to remember. Perhaps to make sense of what was happening. On the night before they reached California, she wrote, "Tomorrow we arrive in the enemy's land. I have heard stories of what Americans do to prisoners. My hands shake as I write this. Mother, if you ever read these words, please know I tried to serve with honor." As dawn broke and the ship approached the dock, the women were ordered on deck. The fog was lifting, revealing the city behind the waterfront, buildings rising into the sky, untouched by war. For women who had lived through constant bombing raids in the Pacific, the sight was strange and unsettling. America looked whole. America looked powerful. Japan had lost everything. Then they heard the noise. At first it was just a rumble, like distant thunder. But as the ship moved closer to the dock, the sound grew louder, sharper, more focused. It was voices, hundreds of voices, screaming voices. The women pressed against the rail, trying to see through the fog, and then they saw the crowd. Civilians packed the dock, men, women, some teenagers, their faces red with anger, their fists raised in the air. American flags waved violently, handmade signs bobbed above the crowd. "Remember Pearl Harbor, Jap killers, send them back." The screaming was so loud it seemed to shake the air itself. Keiko's legs went weak. She grabbed the woman next to her for support. Around her, others began to cry. One woman whispered, "This is how we die." Another made a small sound like a wounded animal. They had expected punishment, yes. They had expected prison. But this was a mob that wanted blood. The ship's engines cut to idle. Ropes were thrown to the dock. The gangway clanged into place. An American officer appeared and shouted in broken Japanese, "Form line, walk, no run, no talk." The women formed two lines, their bodies pressed close together, seeking comfort and nearness. Their hearts pounded. Their breathing came quick and shallow. As the first woman stepped onto the gangway, a rock flew through the air and hit the metal beside her with a sharp clang. The crowd roared louder. This was not the beginning they had imagined. This was terror. The moment the first woman's foot touched the dock, the crowd surged forward. Police officers in uniform struggled to hold back the mass of bodies pressing against the wooden barriers. A woman in the front row, maybe 50 years old, screamed at the Japanese prisoners, "My son died at Iwo Jima. You monsters! You murderers!" Others joined, their voices blending into a wall of hatred so thick it felt like a physical thing pushing against the prisoners. The Japanese women froze. Training had taught them to march in formation, to follow orders, to maintain dignity, but training had not prepared them for this. Several women stumbled, nearly falling. Others raised their arms over their heads, protecting themselves from thrown objects. More rocks, wadded paper, even someone's shoe. "Move! Keep moving!" American military guards ran forward, forming a corridor along both sides of the line of prisoners. There were maybe 20 guards, all young men in U.S. Army uniforms, their faces serious and tense. They didn't look at the prisoners, they looked at the crowd. Keiko walked in the middle of the line, her eyes fixed on the back of the woman in front of her. She could feel the hatred like heat radiating from the crowd. Spit flew through the air. A man broke through the barrier and ran toward them, his fist raised. 2 guards tackled him before he could reach the prisoners. The man screamed as they dragged him back, his voice hoarse with rage. "They killed Americans. They deserve to die." For a moment, Keiko thought the guards might let the crowd through. She had been told that Americans were brutal, that they showed no mercy to Japanese prisoners, especially women. In the Japanese military, female prisoners of the enemy were considered forever dishonored. She had been taught that capture was worse than death. Now facing this screaming mob, she believed it. But the guards didn't step aside. Instead, they moved closer to the prisoners, tightening the protective corridor. One guard, a tall man with red hair and freckles, positioned himself directly beside Keiko. When a bottle flew toward her, he stepped in front and took the impact on his shoulder. He didn't even flinch. He just adjusted his stance and kept walking. Keiko stared at his back, confused. Why would he protect her? She was the enemy. She had worked for the Japanese military, had helped coordinate communications that led to battles where Americans died. This man should hate her. This man should want her dead. Yet here he was, using his body as a shield. The walk from the ship to the waiting trucks was only about 200 yards, but it felt like miles. Every step brought new screams, new insults, new objects thrown through the air. A young Japanese woman near the front of the line, a girl barely 20 who had been a secretary, suddenly broke down sobbing. Her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees on the dock. The crowd cheered at her fall, mocking her tears. But before the guards could react, another prisoner, an older woman named Tomoko, 35, who had been a senior nurse, bent down and lifted the crying girl to her feet. "We walk with dignity," Tomoko said quietly in Japanese. "We do not give them the satisfaction of seeing us broken." The girl wiped her eyes and nodded. Together they continued forward. 3 military trucks waited at the end of the dock, their canvas covers rolled back. The guards directed the women toward them, working quickly now. The crowd was getting more aggressive. More people were trying to break through the barriers. Police whistles shrieked. Someone threw a glass bottle that shattered on the ground near the prisoners, sending sharp fragments across the wood. "In! Get in! Now!" one of the officers shouted, pointing at the trucks. The women scrambled up, helping each other into the truck beds. There were no seats, just hard metal floors. They pressed together, trying to make room for everyone. Keiko found herself squished between 2 other women, all of them breathing hard, all of them trembling. As the last women climbed aboard, the guards jumped up after them. They stood at the back of each truck, facing outward toward the crowd, creating a human barrier between the prisoners and the mob. The red-haired guard who had protected Keiko was right there, his back to her, his hand resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't draw the weapon, but the message was clear. He would if he had to. The truck engines roared to life. The vehicles lurched forward. The crowd followed, running alongside, still screaming, still throwing things. A man with a twisted face of pure hatred got close enough to spit at the truck. The guards didn't move. They just stood there, solid, unmoving, like human walls. As the trucks pulled away from the waterfront and turned onto the city streets, the crowd gradually fell behind, though their screams echoed between the buildings. Finally, after several minutes, the noise faded. The women in the trucks sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide, their bodies still shaking with adrenaline and fear. One woman started to cry, then another. Soon soft sobs filled the truck, a sound of relief and shock mixed together. They were alive. They had made it through the mob. But at what cost? And what came next? The trucks drove for over an hour, leaving the city behind and moving into countryside that seemed impossibly green after the gray wasteland of war-torn Japan. Fields stretched on both sides of the road. Trees lined the highways. Houses stood intact, painted white and yellow, with gardens in front. Children played in yards. Normal life, untouched life. The women stared at everything, trying to understand what they were seeing. This was the enemy nation? This place of abundance and peace? Where were the ruins? Where were the hungry children and burned buildings? Everything they had been told about America, that it was suffering, that it was weak, that it was on the verge of collapse, all of it was lies. The evidence was right in front of them, undeniable and overwhelming. Keiko watched a woman hanging laundry in her backyard as the truck passed. Just a normal woman, doing a normal task in a normal world. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a dream. In Japan, women were digging through rubble for scraps of food. Here they hung clean clothes to dry in the sun. The red-haired guard who had protected her earlier finally turned around. He looked at the prisoners, his eyes moving from face to face. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down at the edge of the truck bed, lowering himself to their level instead of standing above them. "Water," he said, pulling a canteen from his belt. He held it out toward them. The women stared at it. No one moved. Was it a trick? Was the water poisoned? Was this some kind of test? The guard waited. When no one took the canteen, he lifted it to his own lips and drank, showing them it was safe. Then he held it out again. "Water. Drink. Hot day." Finally, Tomoko, the older nurse who had helped the crying girl, reached out and took the canteen. She sniffed it carefully, then took a small sip. Her eyes widened. It was cool, clean water, not the warm, metallic-tasting liquid they'd been given on the ship. She drank more, then passed it to the woman next to her. The canteen moved from hand to hand. When it was empty, the guard refilled it from a larger container at the front of the truck and passed it back. This happened 3 times until all the women had drunk their fill. "Thank you," Keiko said quietly in English. She had learned some English in school before the war. The guard looked at her, surprised. "You speak English?" "Little bit. Small." She held her thumb and finger close together to show how little. The guard nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "That crowd at the dock, that's not everyone, you understand? Not everyone is like that." Keiko wasn't sure she understood all the words, but she understood the tone. He was trying to tell her something important. She nodded slowly. "Those people," the guard continued, gesturing back toward the city. "They lost sons, brothers, husbands in the war. They're angry. They're hurt. But they won't hurt you. We won't let them." "Why?" Keiko asked. It was the question burning in her mind. "We are enemy." The guard looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that would stay with her forever. "The war is over. You're prisoners now, yes. But you're also people. And we don't let mobs hurt people. That's not who we are." He said it so simply, like it was obvious, like it was the only way things could be. But to Keiko, it was revolutionary. In the Japanese military, prisoners were considered less than human. Capturing enemy soldiers, and especially enemy women, was seen as the ultimate dishonor. Prisoners had no rights, no protections, no dignity. Yet here was this American guard, this enemy soldier, telling her that even as his enemy, she was still a person deserving of safety. The contradiction was almost impossible to process. As the truck continued through the California countryside, Keiko stared at the back of the guard's head, trying to understand what kind of world she had entered, trying to reconcile everything she had been taught with everything she was experiencing. The war might be over, but a different kind of battle was just beginning. A battle inside her own mind, between what she had believed and what she was starting to see. The trucks finally pulled through the gates of what the guards called Camp Norton, a temporary holding facility in the Central Valley of California. The camp was surrounded by chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, but compared to the hellish conditions the women expected, it looked almost normal. Wooden barracks stood in neat rows. Paths between them were swept clean. Small gardens with flowers grew near the administrative buildings. Guard towers rose at each corner, but the guards in them looked relaxed, even bored. As the women climbed down from the trucks, their legs stiff from the long ride, they bunched together instinctively, finding safety in numbers. American soldiers watched them from various points around the camp, but none approached aggressively. An officer with gray hair and glasses walked forward, holding a clipboard. "I am Major Roberts," he said in slow, careful English. "This is your camp until we determine your final placement. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention for Prisoners of War. You will receive food, shelter, medical care, and clothing. You will work, but work will be light and paid. You will not be harmed." A Japanese-American interpreter, a young woman in U.S. Army uniform, stepped forward and translated everything into Japanese. The prisoners listened in silence, their faces showing nothing. They had learned not to show emotion, not to reveal weakness. "First," the major continued, "you will go to processing. You will receive medical examination, clean clothing, and hot showers. Your belongings will be cataloged. Any personal items not considered dangerous will be returned to you. You will then be assigned to barracks and given your daily schedule." The word showers sent a ripple of fear through the women. In Japanese propaganda, they had been told that American showers were actually gas chambers, that this was how the Americans would execute them. Several women grabbed each other's hands, preparing for the worst. But the major just nodded to a female officer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, who gestured for the prisoners to follow her. "Come on, ladies, let's get you cleaned up." The processing building was long and narrow, divided into sections. First came the medical station, where American nurses waited with stethoscopes and blood pressure cuffs. The prisoners were examined one by one. Weight, height, temperature, blood pressure, examination of any wounds or illnesses. Keiko stepped up when her name was called. The nurse, a woman named Margaret, according to her name tag, smiled at her. "Hello, honey. Let's see how you're doing." The examination was thorough, but gentle. Margaret checked Keiko's breathing, looked in her ears and throat, examined her hands and feet. When she discovered a long scar on Keiko's arm from a piece of shrapnel, she made a sympathetic sound. "That must have hurt. Does it still bother you?" Keiko understood enough English to shake her head. The scar was old, from a bombing raid on Saipan months ago. Margaret made notes on her clipboard, then handed Keiko a small paper cup with 2 white pills. "Vitamins, you're malnourished. These will help." Keiko stared at the pills. Again the fear. Poison? Margaret seemed to understand. She took another cup, dumped 2 identical pills into her own hand, and swallowed them with water. Then she smiled and pointed at Keiko's cup. Your turn. Keiko swallowed the pills. They tasted bitter, but not unusual. Margaret patted her shoulder. Good girl. Next station. At each stop, the women were treated with matter-of-fact professionalism. No one yelled, no one threatened, no one hurt them. It was so different from what they expected that it was almost more frightening than cruelty would have been. Cruelty they understood. Kindness was a mystery. The shower room was the final station. Steam rose from behind a row of curtained stalls. The prisoners stood in a tight group near the entrance, frozen with fear. This was it. This was where the executions would happen. Several women began to cry. Others prayed quietly. The female officer in charge, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, another Japanese-American, spoke to them in Japanese. I know what you've been told. I know you think the showers are something terrible. They're not. They're just showers. Hot water, soap, that's all. Watch. She walked into one of the stalls fully clothed and turned on the water. Hot water streamed out, creating clouds of steam. She put her hand under it, letting the water run over her fingers. Then she walked back out, her uniform sleeve soaked. See? Just water. Still no one moved. Lieutenant Chen sighed. I'll tell you what, I'll be right here the whole time. The door stays open. If anything bad happens, which it won't, you can run out. But you need to wash. You've been on a ship for 2 weeks. You need to be clean for your health. Finally, Tomoko, the nurse who seemed to be the unofficial leader among the prisoners, stepped forward. I will go first. If I die, you will know. She walked into a stall, her back straight, her head high. The other women held their breath. The water turned on. They heard the sound of it hitting the tiles. Then after a long moment, they heard something else. A long, deep sigh of relief. Tomoko's voice came from behind the curtain, speaking in Japanese. It's real. It's just water, hot water, and soap, real soap. One by one, the other women entered the stalls. Keiko found herself in a small space with white tiles, a shower head above, and a bar of white soap on a metal dish. She turned the knob and hot water burst out, warmer than anything she'd felt in months. She stood under it, letting it soak her hair, her skin, washing away the grime and oil and fear. She picked up the soap. It smelled like flowers, roses maybe, or lavender. In Japan, toward the end of the war, soap had become impossible to find. People washed with ash and water, or nothing at all. But here was real soap, thick and white, the kind her mother had used before the war. Keiko began to cry. She couldn't help it. The tears mixed with the shower water, running down her face. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't relief. It was something more complicated, a release of tension she'd been holding for months, maybe years. The hot water and soap weren't just cleaning her body. They were stripping away the layers of propaganda and fear, exposing something raw underneath. When she finally turned off the water and stepped out, a clean towel and fresh clothing waited on a bench. A simple gray dress, underwear, socks, and canvas shoes. No uniform, just plain clothes. She dried herself and dressed, her movements slow, almost mechanical. The woman who emerged from that shower room was not the same woman who had entered. Something had changed. The war had told her that Americans were monsters. The mob at the dock had seemed to confirm it. But the guards who protected her, the nurse who examined her gently, the hot water and soap given freely, these things didn't match the story she'd been taught, and that mismatch was creating a crack in the wall of belief she'd built her entire life upon. After showers and clean clothes, the women were led to the mess hall, a long building with rows of tables and benches. The smell hit them the moment they entered. Coffee, bread, meat, something sweet. Several women stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the scent of real food. They hadn't eaten since early morning, just a small rice bowl on the ship. Now it was late afternoon and their stomachs were empty and cramping. But still, fear held them back. Food could be poisoned. This could still be a trap. The mess hall was already half full of American soldiers eating their lunch. The soldiers looked up when the prisoners entered, their conversations stopping mid-sentence. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Some soldiers stared with curiosity, others with obvious dislike. A few turned away, refusing to look at the Japanese women at all. But then an older soldier, a sergeant with gray at his temples, stood up and walked to the serving line. He filled a tray with food, 2 slices of bread, a scoop of stew, carrots, and a cup of coffee. He walked to an empty table, sat down, and began to eat, completely normal, completely calm. The major appeared and gestured to the prisoners. Form a line. Get your food. Sit and eat. Slowly, hesitantly, the women moved forward. Keiko found herself at the serving counter, where a cook in a stained white apron plopped a large spoonful of beef stew onto her plate. She stared at it. There were chunks of meat, actual meat, floating in thick brown gravy. 2 slices of white bread appeared next to it, then carrots, then a cup filled with dark coffee. It was more food than she'd seen in a single meal in 6 months. She carried her tray to a table where other prisoners were already sitting. They all stared at their plates, unsure. Finally, Tomoko picked up her spoon and took a small taste of the stew. Her eyes closed. For a moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "It's good. It's real." That was all the permission the others needed. They began to eat, tentatively at first, then faster, their hunger overcoming their fear. Some women ate so quickly they made themselves cough. Others ate slowly, as if trying to make it last forever. Keiko bit into the white bread. It was soft and slightly sweet, nothing like the hard black bread of wartime Japan. The butter melted on her tongue. The stew was rich and warm, the meat tender. She wanted to cry again, but she forced herself to keep control. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Around the mess hall, the American soldiers had resumed eating and talking, though many still glanced at the prisoners occasionally. The red-haired guard from the truck sat at a nearby table. He caught Keiko's eye and gave a small nod. She nodded back, unsure what it meant, but feeling somehow that an understanding had been reached. They were enemies, but they were also somehow sharing a meal. And that simple act, eating in the same room, breathing the same air, was more revolutionary than any speech or declaration could have been. Over the following days, a routine established itself. The women woke to a bell at 6 a.m., washed, and went to breakfast. After breakfast, they were assigned to work details, some in the camp laundry, others in the vegetable gardens, a few helping in the kitchen. The work was light, nothing like the grueling labor they had done during the war, and they were paid, a small amount in camp scrip that could be spent at the canteen. The canteen was a revelation. Inside a small wooden building, shelves held items that seemed impossible. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, writing paper, pencils, even small toiletry items like toothbrushes and hand cream. Keiko stood in front of the chocolate display for a full minute, just staring. In Japan, chocolate had disappeared years ago. Even the military officers rarely got any. But here, in a prisoner of war camp, it sat on shelves, available for purchase. She bought a Hershey bar with her first week's wages. When she bit into it that night, lying on her bunk in the barracks, the sweetness exploded in her mouth. She ate it slowly, making it last, while around her other women did the same with their own small treasures. "This makes no sense," one woman whispered in the darkness. "Why do they give us chocolate? Why do they feed us like this?" No one had an answer. During the day, the women worked alongside American soldiers who treated them with distant professionalism. The guards didn't chat with them, didn't try to be friends, but they also didn't abuse them. If a prisoner needed something, a tool, water, help lifting something heavy, the guards provided it without comment. One afternoon, Keiko was working in the garden, pulling weeds under the hot California sun, when the red-haired guard walked past. He stopped and watched her for a moment, then said, "You're doing that wrong, like this." He knelt down and showed her how to pull the weeds from the roots so they wouldn't grow back. Then he stood up and walked away without waiting for thanks. Such moments happened repeatedly, small interactions that chipped away at the wall of hatred the women had been taught to feel. It was hard to hate someone who showed you how to weed a garden. It was hard to fear someone who handed you water when you were thirsty. 3 weeks into their captivity, the prisoners were told they could write letters home. Paper and pencils were provided. The letters would be read by censors, they were told, but anything not concerning military information would be sent. Keiko sat at a table in the barracks, staring at the blank page, unsure what to write. How could she tell her mother the truth? That she was clean, fed, treated well? That she ate meat and bread every day? That she had been given chocolate? In her mind, she imagined her mother, back in their small apartment in Osaka, if the apartment still stood. When Keiko had left for military service 2 years ago, food was already scarce. By now, with Japan defeated and occupied, conditions must be unbearable. Her mother was probably surviving on scraps, boiling weeds for soup, standing in long lines for a handful of rice, and Keiko was eating beef stew and butter bread. The guilt was crushing. She put her head in her hands, unable to write. Around her, other women struggled with the same conflict. Some wrote simple lies. "I am being treated according to military law. Do not worry. I am strong." Others couldn't write at all and simply sat, tears running down their faces. Tomoko, the nurse, was one of the few who wrote honestly, "Mother, I do not know how to tell you this. The enemy feeds us well. We have shelter and medicine. I am ashamed to be healthy while you suffer. But I want you to know I am alive. I will come home when they allow it. Please survive until then." When the letters were collected, many women had written nothing at all. The guilt was too heavy to put into words. That night, Keiko lay in her bunk, unable to sleep. The barracks were clean and warm. Her stomach was full. Her body was stronger than it had been in months. She was a prisoner, yes, but she was alive and healthy. And her mother was probably starving. "How do we live with this?" she whispered to the woman in the bunk next to her. The woman, a former radio operator named Yuki, whispered back, "I don't know. Every bite of food feels like a betrayal. But we didn't ask for this. We didn't choose to be captured. Does that matter? Our families suffer while we are comfortable. The Americans are supposed to be our enemies, but they treat us better than our own government did at the end. It was a dangerous thought, one that bordered on treason even now. But it was also true. In the final months of the war, the Japanese military had provided almost nothing for its auxiliary personnel. Rations had dwindled to almost nothing. Medical care was non-existent. Women had been expected to serve until death, with no care for their well-being. Here in an enemy prison camp, they received 3 meals a day, medical attention, clean clothes, and even payment for their work. The contradiction was unbearable. Once a week, some prisoners were taken outside the camp for work details in the nearby town. They rode in trucks under guard, but the guards were more relaxed now, less tense than they had been at the beginning. Keiko was selected for one of these details, along with a dozen other women. They were taken to a local farm to help with harvesting vegetables, work that would benefit both the farm and the camp's food supply. As the truck drove through the small California town, the women pressed against the sides, staring at everything. The main street was lined with shops, their windows full of goods. People walked on sidewalks, carrying shopping bags. Children played in a park. Everything was normal, untouched by war. At the farm, they worked in the fields alongside the farmer, his wife, and 2 teenage daughters. At first, the farmer's family was clearly uncomfortable, keeping their distance, speaking to the guards rather than to the prisoners. But as the day wore on and the work continued, the distance began to shrink. At lunchtime, the farmer's wife brought out sandwiches and lemonade for everyone, including the prisoners. She set the trays down, hesitated, then spoke directly to Keiko. "You all work hard. Eat." Keiko bowed without thinking, a deep Japanese bow of thanks. The farmer's wife looked surprised, then nodded and walked away. During the lunch break, the farmer's younger daughter, maybe 16, came and sat near the prisoners. She didn't say anything at first, just watched them eat. Finally, she asked her, "Do you speak English?" Keiko nodded. "Little bit." "What's your name?" "Keiko." "I'm Susan." The girl offered a shy smile. It must be scary being so far from home. Keiko didn't know how to respond to that. Scary? Yes, but also confusing and strange, and nothing like what she had expected. Finally, she just nodded. Susan looked like she wanted to say more, but her mother called her away. As she left, she turned back and said, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're okay." It was a small moment, barely anything, but it lodged in Keiko's heart like a splinter. This American girl, who should have hated her, who had every right to see her as an enemy, had offered kindness instead. On the truck ride back to camp, Keiko stared out at the passing landscape, her mind churning. Everything she had been taught about Americans, that they were devils, that they were cruel, that they valued nothing but violence, was being systematically proven wrong. Not through speeches or propaganda, but through small daily acts of basic human decency. And that was perhaps the most devastating weapon of all. At night, after lights out, the women whispered to each other in the darkness of their barracks. These conversations were where the real transformation happened, where doubts were voiced, where questions were asked. "Do you remember what they told us in training?" one woman asked. "That Americans were barbarians?" "I remember," another replied. "They said Americans would torture us, rape us, kill us slowly. But they haven't. No, they haven't." Silence, heavy with meaning. "My brother died fighting Americans," Yuki said quietly. "He was killed on Guadalcanal. I hated Americans for that. I thought they were monsters who murdered my brother. And now? Now I don't know what to think. The guards here? They're just men. Young men. Some of them probably have brothers too. Maybe some of their brothers died fighting Japanese soldiers. But they don't take revenge on us. Why?" Keiko spoke up from her bunk. "The guard who protected me at the dock, the red-haired one, he told me something. He said we're still people, even though we're enemies. He said that's why they protect us." "People." Tomoko repeated the word softly. "They see us as people." "Did Japan see its prisoners as people?" another woman asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered because everyone knew the answer. Japanese military doctrine held that surrender was the ultimate dishonor, that prisoners had forfeited their humanity. The few Allied prisoners Japan had taken were treated brutally, worked to death, starved, beaten, and yet here in an American camp, Japanese prisoners were fed, sheltered, paid for their work, and protected from angry civilians. The contrast was too stark to ignore. "I think," Keiko said slowly, "that maybe we were lied to, about a lot of things." No one contradicted her. In the darkness, she heard small sounds, someone crying softly, someone else sighing deeply. The walls of belief that had held them together through the war were crumbling, and no one knew what would be left when they finally fell. 2 months into their captivity, the women were allowed to use a community bathroom that had mirrors, real glass mirrors, the first many of them had seen since before the war. Keiko stood in front of one and barely recognized herself. Her face had filled out, her cheeks had color, her hair, which had been dull and brittle, now shone. Her eyes were clearer. She looked healthy. She looked alive. She touched her face with her fingers, pressing against her cheeks, making sure the reflection was real. Behind her, other women gathered at the mirrors, having the same revelation. They were all transformed. In 2 months of American captivity, they had gained weight, regained their health, regained their humanity. "We look Japanese again," Yuki said, staring at her reflection. "For months we looked like ghosts. Now we look like people." Tomoko stood at the center mirror, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. Tears ran down her face. "I should be ashamed," she whispered. "I should be ashamed that I'm healthy. But I'm not. I'm grateful. And that makes me ashamed." The contradiction, the guilt of survival, the betrayal of comfort hung over all of them. They had been taught that Americans were evil, that capture was worse than death. But here they were, healthier and safer than they had been under their own military's care. The enemy had restored their humanity. Their own nation had stripped it away. Keiko wrote in her notebook that night, "Today I looked in a mirror and saw a stranger. She looks like me, but she is not the woman who left Japan. That woman believed what she was told. This woman has questions that have no answers. The Americans call us prisoners, but my body has never been more free. The war is over, but the battle in my heart is just beginning." One afternoon, while working in the laundry, Keiko found herself working near the red-haired guard. He was supervising the detail as always, but today he seemed quieter than usual, almost sad. Without thinking, Keiko asked, "You okay?" He looked surprised that she had spoken to him. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said, "Got a letter today, from home." Keiko waited. "My brother was killed in the Philippines 2 months ago." The words hit Keiko like a physical blow. She stopped folding the laundry in her hands. I'm sorry." The guard nodded. His eyes were red like he'd been crying. He was 19, just a kid. Keiko didn't know what to say. This man's brother had died fighting her countrymen, and here he was, guarding her, protecting her, treating her with basic decency despite his loss. "I'm sorry," she said again, because there were no other words. The guard looked at her directly. "You didn't kill him. You were just a radio operator, right? On some island somewhere?" Keiko nodded. "Then it's not your fault. War is bigger than any of us. We all just got caught up in it." He walked away then, leaving Keiko standing with a half-folded sheet in her hands, her mind reeling. This man had every reason to hate her. His brother had died fighting Japan. Yet he didn't blame her personally. He saw the difference between a nation at war and an individual person. Could she do the same? Could she separate the American nation that had bombed Japanese cities from individual Americans like this guard, who showed her kindness despite his grief? It was the question that defined everything. The transformation completed itself on a Sunday afternoon in October. The prisoners were allowed a rest day, and some chose to sit outside in the autumn sunshine, enjoying the weather. Keiko sat with Yuki and Tomoko under a tree near their barracks. They had been talking about nothing important, the weather, the food, small gossip about other prisoners, when Yuki suddenly said, "I don't want to go home." The words fell like stones into still water. Tomoko stared at her. "What did you say?" "I don't want to go home. There's nothing left there. My city is destroyed. My family is probably dead. I'll starve within a week." Yuki's voice trembled. "Here, I'm alive. I'm fed. I'm treated like a human being. In Japan, I'll be treated like a traitor for surrendering." "You didn't surrender," Tomoko said. "You were captured. Does anyone care about the difference? I'm a woman who was taken prisoner. That's shame enough." Keiko knew Yuki was right. In Japanese culture, any soldier who surrendered, but especially women, faced social death. They would be rejected by their families, shunned by their communities, marked forever as dishonorable. Better to have died, the culture said. Better to have taken their own lives than face capture. But they hadn't died. They had survived. And now they were healthy, fed, and safe, in a place where no one looked at them with shame. "I want to go home," Tomoko said quietly. "I want to see my mother. I want to rebuild. But I'm afraid too. Afraid of what we'll find. Afraid of how we'll be treated. Afraid they'll ask us what it was like here," Keiko added, "and we'll have to lie." "Why lie?" Yuki asked. "Because if we tell the truth, that the Americans fed us, clothed us, paid us, protected us from mobs, who will believe us? They'll think we're traitors. They'll think we've been brainwashed." "Maybe we have been," Tomoko said. "Maybe this kindness is just another kind of weapon." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Kindness wasn't a weapon. It was just kindness. And it had done what all the propaganda and threats and military training could never do. It had made them see their enemies as human beings. And once you saw someone as human, everything changed. In November, 3 months after their arrival, the announcement came. The Japanese women prisoners would be repatriated. Ships were being organized to return them to Japan, where they would be released to whatever remained of their families and homes. The news was met with mixed reactions. Some women cried with joy at the thought of going home. Others sat in silence, their faces unreadable. A few, like Yuki, openly expressed dread. "We have 1 week," the major announced through the interpreter. "Use this time to prepare. You will be allowed to take with you any personal items you have acquired here, within reason. Letters will be provided that explain you were prisoners of war and were treated according to international law." After the announcement, the camp fell into a strange mood. Women packed their few belongings slowly, as if delaying could somehow delay the inevitable. Conversations grew quieter. The laughter that had started to emerge in recent weeks disappeared. Keiko found herself walking the campgrounds one evening, looking at everything as if seeing it for the first time. The barracks where she had slept in a real bed with clean sheets. The mess hall where she had eaten 3 meals a day. The garden where she had learned to pull weeds properly. The laundry where she had worked alongside the red-haired guard. All of it had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a sanctuary. She thought about Japan, about what awaited her there. Ruined cities, starving people, occupation forces, shame. Would her mother still be alive? Would their home still stand? And if Keiko told her mother the truth about her captivity, that she had been treated well, fed well, kept safe, would her mother believe her? Or would she think Keiko had betrayed her nation by accepting the enemy's kindness? In the final days before departure, the guards seemed different too. They spoke more to the prisoners, offering small bits of advice. "When you get home, be careful. Japan is different now. Occupied. Food is scarce. Stay safe." The red-haired guard found Keiko in the laundry on the second to last day. He handed her a small paper bag. "For the journey," he said. Inside were 3 Hershey bars and a pack of crackers. Keiko stared at the bag, then at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "You'll be hungry on the ship. Food isn't great during transport. I can't take this. It's yours. I want you to have it." He paused. "Look, I know we were enemies. I know my country and your country did terrible things to each other, but you're just a person. You didn't start the war. You just got caught up in it, like all of us. So take the chocolate, and when you eat it, remember that not all Americans were your enemy." Keiko felt tears prickling her eyes. She bowed deeply, the formal Japanese bow of profound gratitude. "Thank you. For everything. For protecting me at the dock. For treating me like a human being." The guard looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, but he nodded. "Good luck, Keiko. I hope you find your family. I hope you rebuild your life. I hope you heal from your brother's death." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people from opposite sides of a war, sharing a moment of understanding that transcended all the propaganda and hatred. Then the guard turned and walked away. Keiko never saw him again. That night, the women gathered in their barracks for the last time. They sat on their bunks, talking quietly, sharing memories of their time in the camp. "Do you think we'll tell anyone the truth?" one woman asked. "I will," Tomoko said firmly. "I will tell my children if I have any. They need to know that even in war, some people choose kindness." "But what if no one believes us?" Yuki asked. "Then at least we'll know the truth. We'll know that the enemy we were taught to hate showed us more compassion than our own leaders did." Tomoko looked around at all the women. "That matters. That has to matter." Keiko wrote in her notebook one final time. "Tomorrow we return to Japan. I am afraid of what I will find, but I am also different than when I left. I came to America expecting death. I found life instead. I came believing Americans were monsters. I found they were human. Flawed, yes, but human. And that simple truth has changed everything. The war is over, but the battle in my heart continues. How do I live in a world where everything I was taught was wrong? How do I honor my nation while acknowledging its lies? I don't have answers, but I have chocolate in my bag and kindness in my memory. Perhaps that is enough to start rebuilding." The ship that took them back to Japan was nothing like the ship that had brought them to America. This one was cleaner, less crowded. The food was adequate. The women were treated with respect by the crew. But as the days passed and they sailed closer to Japan, anxiety grew. They were returning to a defeated nation, an occupied nation, a nation that would see them as tainted by their capture. When the ship finally pulled into Yokohama harbor, the women gathered on deck, staring at their homeland. Even from the ship, they could see the devastation. Buildings were reduced to rubble. The harbor was filled with sunken ships. People on the docks looked thin, ragged, desperate. "This is our home," Yuki whispered, "but it looks like hell." As they disembarked, they were processed by American occupation forces, given identification papers, and released. No crowd met them. No one cared about the return of a few dozen female POWs. There were bigger problems to deal with. Keiko stood on the dock with her small bag of belongings, watching the other women scatter in different directions, seeking family, seeking home. She was supposed to go to Osaka to find her mother, to try to rebuild a life. But standing there looking at the ruins of her nation, she felt more alone than she had ever felt in the American camp. The final entry in Keiko's notebook was written 5 years later in 1950. I found my mother. She had survived living in a refugee camp. When I told her I had been a prisoner of the Americans, she wept and apologized for my shame. I told her there was no shame. She didn't understand. How could she? She had not seen what I saw. She had not experienced what I experienced. I married, had a daughter. I tell her stories of the war sometimes, carefully chosen stories. Someday, when she is older, I will tell her the truth, that I was captured by the enemy and they treated me with dignity, that a guard gave me chocolate. That kindness, even from an enemy, is the most powerful force in the world. The war took much from us, but it also taught me this. Hatred is easy, forgiveness is hard, and humanity persists even in the darkest times. The Americans showed me that, and I will never forget. And so the soap and hot water became more than just cleanliness. The chocolate and bread became more than just food. They became proof that even in war, even between enemies, humanity can survive. For those 47 Japanese women, the memory of American guards standing between them and an angry mob became a symbol of something profound. That we can choose who we want to be, even in the worst circumstances. Keiko's story is just one of thousands from World War II that challenge our understanding of war, of enemies, of what it means to be human. The guards at Camp Norton didn't have to protect those women from the mob. They didn't have to treat them with dignity. They didn't have to feed them well or pay them for their work. But they did. And in doing so, they proved that even the enemy can show mercy, and sometimes mercy cuts deeper than hatred. As Keiko wrote in her notebook, kindness from an enemy is harder to carry than cruelty. Cruelty confirms what you believe. Kindness forces you to question everything. Those words, written in 1945 by a young Japanese woman in an American prison camp, still speak to us today. They remind us that even in our darkest moments, we have a choice. We can choose hatred or we can choose humanity. And that is the story worth remembering. If you found this true story meaningful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, untold stories from World War II. These stories buried in history still have the power to change how we see the world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story, and let us know in the comments. Had you heard about Japanese women POWs in America before? What surprised you most about this story? Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, history is not just about nations and armies. It's about individual people making individual choices in impossible circumstances. And sometimes those choices change everything.